Om Namo Bhagavate Śrī Aruṇācala Ramanaya Namaskaram. Today I'm going to be talking about the second verse of Śrī Aruṇācala Aṣṭakam. What Bhagavan says in this verse, I'll first read the verse and then I'll go through the meaning. Kandava nevanena karutiro nada, kandava nindrida nindradu kandain, kandana indrida karutera ville, kandilan indrida karuteru marin. Vindidu vilakidu viraluruvona, vindile panduni vilakine endral, Vindida dunnile vilakida vendre, vindala machalama vilangida nindrai. So that is the verse. I will go through the meanings. Well, I'll first read the overall meaning. When investigating within the mind who he who saw is, I saw what remains when he who saw was completely non-existent. The mind did not rise to say, I saw. In what way would the mind rise to say, I did not see? Who has the power to elucidate this speaking, when in ancient times you elucidated without speaking? Only to elucidate your nature without speaking, you stood shining as a sky-earth hill. That's the literal meaning. I'll go through it sentence by sentence and explain the meaning. The first sentence is, if that's the first line, Kandavan evanena karutil nada, Kandavan indrida nindradu kandain. That means when investigating within the mind who he who saw is, I saw what remains when he who saw was completely non-existent. So this is the practice of self-investigation Bhagavan is describing here. So he's saying when he investigated within the mind to see who the seer is, he saw what remained when the seer was completely non-existent. That implies was thereby found to be completely non-existent. Then in the next sentence he says, that is, in that sentence he says, I saw. But in this sentence he clarifies, Kandana nendrida karutera ville. That means the mind did not rise to say, I saw. And then the next sentence, Kandilan endrida karuteru marin. In what way would the mind rise to say, I did not see? That is, when the seer disappears, there's no mind remaining to rise and say either I saw or I did not see. So it's not the mind that saw, is what Bhagavan makes clear here. The next sentence is, Vindidu vilakidu viruluruvona, vindile panduni vilakine yendral. That means, who has the power to elucidate this speaking, when in ancient times you elucidated without speaking? That implies in ancient times you, as Dakshinamurti, the Adi Guru, the original Guru, elucidated this reality without speaking. He elucidated in silence. So when such is the case, who has the power to elucidate it by speaking, by words, in other words? And then he concludes the verse, Vindida dunnile vilakida vendre, vindala machalama vilangida nindrai. Only to elucidate your nature without speaking, you stood shining as a sky-earth hill. I will explain in more detail this, what he means by sky-earth hill. I'll now begin to go through a more detailed explanation of the verse. That is, I'm in the process of writing a detailed explanation about each of the verses. For this second verse, I've more or less completed it, so I'll read the draft that I've written, because that is, in Bhagavan's verses, the verses have a meaning but beyond the meaning, there's a huge amount of implication underlying the meaning. So in my explanations, I try to bring out not only the meaning, but also all the, well, at least maybe not all the implications, but a lot of the implications, but what is implied in these verses, what Bhagavan implies in these verses. So in the first line, when investigating within the mind who he who saw is, I saw what remains when he who saw was completely non-existent. This is a very clear and carefully worded description of the practice and ultimate result of Atma-vichara, self-investigation. As Bhagavan clarified in the 16th paragraph of Nana, the practice of Atma-vichara is just sadakalamum manate atma-vilvetirubdu, always keeping the mind on oneself. So that's what the practice is. And as he made clear elsewhere, to the extent to which we keep our mind, meaning our attention, on ourselves, we as ego, the one who sees or knows all other things, will thereby subside. So if we keep our mind on ourselves so keenly that we thereby cease to be aware of anything else whatsoever, we will dissolve forever back into our own motionless being, which is the source from which we have risen as ego. That is, we seem to be ego only so long as we are seeing or knowing or experiencing or being aware of anything other than ourselves. But if we look back at ourselves to see what this ego is, we will find no such thing. As he implies in verse 17 of Upadesha Undiyya, Manatin uruve maravadu-chava manameno ondrile. That means when one investigates the form of the mind, namely its form of light, that he referred to in the previous verse, meaning its essential nature as the fundamental awareness I am, when we investigate that without forgetting, there's no such thing as mind at all. And in verse 25 of Ulladu, he says, Tedinal otum pidicum. If seeking, it will take flight. Though Tedinal means just if seeking, without in this case specifying who is to seek what, in this context it implies if ego seeks its own reality by investigating who am I, or in other words, if ego seeks to know what it actually is by investigating itself. Otum pidicum, it will take flight, it will flee, or it will run away, implies that it will subside and dissolve back into its source. So this sentence, that's in verse 25 of Ulladu, implies that to the extent to which we attend to ourselves, we as ego will thereby subside. And if we attend to ourselves keenly enough, we will thereby dissolve forever back into our fundamental being awareness, Sat-Chit, I am, which is the source from which we had risen. This is what Bhagavan implies when he sings, Kandavan Evan ena karutiro nada, Kandavan indrida nindradu kandain. When investigating within the mind who he who saw is, I saw what remained when he who saw was completely non-existent. What remains when the seer, namely ego, ceases to exist is what we always actually are, namely Sat-Chit, pure being awareness, which sees itself just by being itself. So what Bhagavan implies by saying, Kandavan indrida nindradu kandain, I saw what remained when he who saw was completely non-existent, is that he remained as what remained, namely Sat-Chit, and thereby knew himself just by being himself. As he says in verse 26 of Upadesha Undiyya, Tanai iritale, tanai aritalam, tani rendatradal. Being oneself alone is knowing oneself, because oneself is devoid of two. That is, our real state in which we remain as Sat-Chit is a state of infinite and indivisible oneness, meaning that we are one only without a second, ekameva advitiyam. So in that state, there are not two things, one to know another. As he says in verse 23 of Upadesha Undiyar, Ulludu unara unavu verin mayin, ulludu unavahum. That means because of the non-being of any awareness other than what is, to know what is awareness. In other words, being is awareness and awareness is being. They're one and the same thing. And this awareness, which is what is, Ulludu, alone is what we actually are. As he points out in the second sentence of this same verse, Unave namai ullam. Awareness alone is as we. However, some people having not paid close attention to what Bhagavan actually says in this verse, and therefore having failed to understand the deep and subtle meaning of this first line, some people have said or written that as a result of self-investigation, we will see the I thought, meaning ego, Vasya, disappear. But how would this be possible? We can see an object disappear, but we cannot see the subject disappear. If we've understood Bhagavan's teachings correctly, it will be clear that seeing the disappearance of ego is a logical impossibility, because who could see it disappear? When ego ceases to exist, it will not be there to see its own cessation or disappearance, just as it is not present to see its own disappearance at the exact moment that it subsides in sleep. And in the clear view of Sat Chit, which alone is what will remain, no such thing as ego has ever existed or even seemed to exist. So how could it see the disappearance of what never existed? Ego seems to exist only in its own view, and only when it is attending to anything other than itself. Because if it attends to itself keenly enough, it will see itself as Sat Chit, which is eternal and immutable, and which had therefore never risen as ego. If we look at what seems to be a snake carefully enough, we will see that it is just a rope and was therefore never anything other than that. Likewise, if we attend to ourselves, who now seem to be ego, carefully enough, we will see that we are just Sat Chit and have therefore never been anything other than that. So no such thing as ego has ever existed, meaning that it has never actually either appeared or disappeared. As Bhagavan implies in this first line, all we will see when ego ceases to exist is what will then remain, namely ourself as we actually are. And we will see what we actually are just by being what we actually are. Being what we actually are means being without rising as ego, as he describes it beautifully in the first sentence of verse 27 of Ulladunapadu. Nanudiyadu ullanilai, namaduvai ullanilai. That means the state in which I is without rising is the state in which we are as that. That is, though we're eternally nothing other than what we actually are, namely Brahman, the one infinite, eternal, immutable, and indivisible reality, which is what is referred to in that verse as that, so long as we rise and stand as ego, we seem to be something other than that, namely a body consisting of 5 sheaths. So in order to be aware of ourselves as we actually are, we need to cease rising as ego. And in order to cease rising as ego, we need to keenly investigate our own being, which is the source from which we've risen as ego. As he implies unequivocally in the second sentence of the same verse by asking, Nan udikum tanam ade nadamal, nan udia tan irpe savadu evan. Without investigating the place where I rises, how to reach the annihilation of oneself in which I does not rise. That is the place, what Bhagavan means when he talks about the place where I'm rising. He's not talking about a an objective place. The place where I rises is our being. That is, ego is the false adjunct conflated awareness, I am this body. That rises from the pure awareness, the real awareness, I am. So that when he says without investigating the place where I rises, he means without investigating our own being. How to reach the annihilation of oneself in which I does not rise. So the only way to annihilate ego is to investigate our being. Bhagavan makes it very, very clear and unequivocal implication. This Bhagavan implies this. He says that Bhagavan gives his teachings in the form of rhetorical questions, but we have to understand what is clearly implied. The clear implication is, unless we investigate our being, we cannot attain the annihilation of ourself, which is the state in which I does not rise. So the only way to know ourselves as we actually are is to investigate our being. We will permanently be without rising as ego only in the state that he describes in that verse of Uludunapadu as tan irupu, annihilation of oneself, meaning annihilation of ego, which is the state that he refers to in this present verse as Kandavan Indrida, when he who saw was completely non-existent. Therefore, though he ended the first sentence of this verse by saying, Kandavan Indrida Nindradu Kandain, I saw what remained when he who saw was completely non-existent, in the second sentence he says, Kandanan Indrida Karutera Ville, the mind did not rise to say, I saw, thereby clarifying that the I that is implicit in Kandain, I saw, is not the rising I, namely ego, the I that rises conflated with adjuncts as I am this body, but only the being I, namely the pure I, which neither rises nor subsides, being eternally bereft of adjuncts. Because that alone is what remains when ego has been found to be non-existent. That is when he says, I saw what remained when the seer became non-existent. Who can see what remains? Only what remains can see what remains. So he's clearly implying here that what he saw, that is, he saw what remained by being what remained. Since the mind does not rise when its root and essence, namely ego, the seer, has been found to be eternally non-existent, it does not exist either to say, I saw or I did not see, as he points out in the third sentence by asking, rhetorically, Kandilan Endrida Karutera Marain. In what way would the mind rise to say, I did not see? That is, it doesn't write, since the mind has ceased to exist, or ceased to appear to exist, it doesn't rise either to say, I have seen or I have not seen. Seeing what remains when the seer has ceased to exist is a seeing that is radically different to any other kind of seeing, because it is an intransitive seeing, meaning that it is a seeing, an awareness, in which there is no object of sight, and hence it transcends all pairs of opposites, such as seeing and not seeing. In any other kind of seeing, three things, a triputi or triad, are involved, namely a seer, something that is seen, and the act of seeing. Whereas in this intransitive seeing, the seer is just awareness, what is seen is just the same awareness, and the seeing is also the same awareness, so they are one and indivisible. Intransitive seeing is not an act of seeing, but a state of just being, so it is eternal and immutable, and hence it is the one real seeing which underlies the appearance of all other kinds of seeing or not seeing. So it's beyond that, the duality of seeing and not seeing. That's why there's no I there to rise and say, I have seen or I have not seen. So it's a state in which there's only one thing, that one pure awareness, which is the seer, the seen, and the seeing. So it's one is not a triputi, but just one and indivisible. So there's no other thing that is seen there. To say either I have seen or I have not seen, and I must rise. So both are ground for ridicule. This, therefore, is what he implies in these two sentences, in which he sings, Kandanan endrida karuteraville, Kandilan endrida karuterumare. The mind did not rise to say I saw. In what way would the mind rise to say I did not see? And he implies the same in verse 33 of Uladunapdu. What he says in this verse is, Enne arienan, enne arindeinan, enno nahepuku idonahum. That means saying either I do not know myself, or I have known myself is ground for ridicule. Enne, why? Tanne videamaka irutan undo. It's a rhetorical question. To make oneself a Vishaya, that's an object, something known by the knower as distinct from itself, are there two selves, a knowing self and a known self. The actual meaning of the sentence is, to make oneself a Vishaya, are there two selves? That implies, is there one self to know another self? Obviously not. And as he says in the final sentence, Andre aneva anubhuti unmayal, because being one is the truth, the experience of everyone. That is, we all experience ourselves as one. So we can never experience ourselves as an object to know as something other than ourselves. So we can know ourselves only by being ourselves. What we actually are is just awareness, in the sense of what is aware. And since we could not be aware without being aware that we are aware, we are always aware of ourself. So if we say, I do not know myself, that is not only untrue, but also ridiculous. Since we are never not aware of ourself, Atma-vichara, self-knowledge or self-awareness, is not something we are yet to attain, but is our very nature. So what is called the attainment of Atma-vichara is actually not gaining anything, but losing everything along with its root, namely ego, which is merely a false awareness of ourself, an awareness of ourself as a body, which is not what we actually are. And when ego is lost, there is no one left to say, I have known myself, because what remains is just what we actually are, which is pure, infinite, eternal, and immutable awareness. Saying I have known myself is therefore as ridiculous as saying I do not know myself. We can say of any Vishaya, any object or phenomenon, either I know it or I do not know it, because Vishayas are things that appear and disappear in our view. So they are distinct from ourselves and can therefore be either known or not known by us. And also because each Vishaya is Visesha. Visesha means it's distinctive. It has distinguishing features, meaning that it has certain features or facts about it of one kind or another that distinguish it from each other Vishaya. And each of its features or facts is something that we can either know or not know. However, we as awareness are not a Vishaya. We do not appear or disappear. We are not distinct from ourselves, and we are nirvisesha, meaning we're not anything but anything distinct. It's difficult to translate nirvisesha, meaning that we are not limited by any distinguishing features or facts, since all features and facts appear and disappear within us. So we are not something that can be known at one time but not known at another time. We are Swayam Prakasha, self-shining, meaning that we know ourselves by our own light of awareness without ever depending on any other thing. So we know ourselves eternally and immutably just by being the awareness that we are. Not only are we not a Vishaya, we can never become a Vishaya or be made into a Vishaya, because as we all know from our own experience, we are one and indivisible. So we can never be divided from ourselves in order to know ourselves as something distinct from ourselves as the knower. Whatever we know as something in any way distinct from ourselves is necessarily other than ourselves. So no Vishaya can be ourselves, and hence we can never be a Vishaya. We who know ourselves, the word Vishaya means object or phenomenon. We who know ourselves and we who are known by ourselves are one and the same self, one and the same I. This is why in this verse of Ulladu, Bhagavan asks rhetorically, Tanne videya maka irutan undo. To make oneself a Vishaya are there two selves, implying that we are not two but only one. So we can never know ourselves as an object, Vishaya, because we always experience ourselves as one and could never experience ourselves as two, as he points out in the final sentence of this verse, Ondrai aneva anubhuti unmayal, because being one is the truth, the experience of everyone. So what Bhagavan teaches us in this verse of Ulladu is what he teaches us in this second verse of, in this second line of the second verse of Aruṇācala Aṣṭakam. When the seer disappears, we remain as what remains, and there's no rising I in that state to say I have seen or I have not seen. However, though the truth is so simple and clear, when we rise and stand as ego, we mistake ourselves to be a Vishaya, or rather a set of Vishayas, namely a body consisting of 5 sheaths. And hence we are seemingly covered by a veil of ignorance, which makes what is real seem unreal and what is clear seem unclear. Through the words of his teaching that he has given us in the form of texts such as Śrī Aruṇācala Aṣṭakam and Ulladu, Bhagavan has clearly shown us the means by which we can remove this veil of ignorance in the form of ego. But though his words are very powerful, they can only point us in the right direction, namely to turn back to face ourselves alone. But they cannot by themselves remove our ignorance by making us see ourselves as we actually are. As he said, according to the purity of the Antakarana, the same teachings reflect in different ways, meaning that how we each understand and apply the teachings is determined by the purity of our inner instrument, Antakarana, which consists of mind, manas, intellect, buddhi, will, chittam, and ego, ahankaram. To see that this is the case, we have only to consider the many different ways in which the Prasthanatraya, the 3 starting points or source texts of Vedanta, namely the Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, and Brahma Sutra, have been and still are interpreted. That is very numerous interpretations of these texts, because according to the purity of the Antakarana, people see different meanings in these texts. That is, these texts are designed to cater for a wide diversity of needs. So everyone understands according to their level of understanding. The purer the mind, the deeper the meaning we will see in these texts. So the deepest of all, the deepest interpretation of all is Advaita. But all the other interpretations, they each are valid from the perspective of those who hold that particular view, because that's all they are able to see. They're not able to see the deeper meaning. no matter how clear a radio signal may be, if it is received by a defective or poor quality radio, the resulting sound will be unclear. Likewise, though Bhagavan has expressed his teachings extremely clearly, both in writing and orally, how well each one of us is able to understand his words and apply them in practice will depend upon the quality of our receiving set, namely our antakarana. Antakarana means the inner instrument. That's mind, intellect, will, and ego. And they're collectively referred to as antakarana. Therefore, if we are to derive the full benefit of his teachings, we require great clarity of mind and heart. And such clarity comes from the infinite silence of pure being, which shines in our heart as grace, the extremely subtle sail, doing, working, or action he referred to in the previous verse when he explained, Amma adisayam idam sail arivaridakam. That is, after saying that Aruṇācala stands as if an insentient hill, he says, Amma adisayam idam sail arivaridakam. Its action is adisaya. That means it's extraordinary, wonderful, preeminent, difficult for anyone to know or understand or appreciate. That is, without his grace, the infinite power of silence, therefore, we will not be able to understand his words and apply them in practice. So his real teaching is not just his words, but the silence of pure being from which they emanated, as he indicated in verse 27 of Upadesha Tanipaka. This verse 27 of Upadesha Tanipaka. It's just a single line verse. Monamul erum orumori arulnileye. What that means is silence is the very nature of grace, the one language that rises within. Arulnileye can mean the very nature of grace, or the actual state of grace. And the orumori, the one language, that one there implies single, non-dual, unique, unequaled, and incomparable language that rises within. When he says it rises within, he implies it's eternally surging forth as the clear light of pure awareness I am, waiting to swallow the mind as soon as it turns back within. So he defines, in this verse, he defines silence as the very nature of grace. And that is the true language. Silence is always shining in our heart as our own being, so it never rises or subsides, and hence it is in a metaphorical sense that he uses the adjectival participle erum, rising, or that rises, in this verse. That is, though silence is pure being and therefore eternally motionless, it is metaphorically said to be rising, surging, or welling up in our heart, because it is always shining so brightly, lively, and clearly as I am, that it can never for a moment be unknown to us. Moreover, when we turn back within to face ourself alone, we will thereby subside back into the heart, and as soon as we subside completely, the silent power of grace will, metaphorically speaking, rise up to devour us, dissolving us forever back into itself. Since silence is the very nature of pure being, it alone can reveal to us the pure being that we actually are, as Bhagavan implies in the third line of this verse. Vindidu vilakidu viruluru vona, vindile panduni vilakine endral. That means, who has the power to elucidate this speaking when in ancient times you elucidated without speaking? By asking this rhetorical question, who has the power to elucidate this by speaking, he implies that no one can ever have the power to make the reality known by words alone. because even the most apt words will fail in their aim unless the power of silence gives the mind the clarity and love not only to understand their full import, but also to put them into practice. The second half of this third line, Vindile Panduni Vilakine Endral, when in ancient times you elucidated without speaking, implies when in ancient times even you, as Dakshinamurti, elucidated without speaking. Dakshinamurti is Lord Shiva in the form of the Adi Guru, the original Guru, who appeared as a 16-year-old boy seated under a banyan tree facing southwards. The significance of facing southwards being that the south is considered to be the direction ruled by Yama, the god of death. And Dakshinamurti vanquishes death by bestowing jnana through the power of his silence. It's significant that when the story of Dakshinamurti is told, it is described that he was seated as a 16-year-old boy. It was at the age of 16 that Bhagavan had his death experience and came to Aruṇācala to come to the throne of Dakshinamurti, to take on the role of Dakshinamurti, to teach the jnana to the whole world. So Bhagavan is Dakshinamurti himself. Bhagavan once told the story of Dakshinamurti as follows. The four Sanakadi rishis, Sanaka, Sanandana, Sanatana, and Sanatkumara, were the first progeny of Brahma, who created them from his mind with the intention that they should help him in his work of creation. But they were born so pure-hearted that they had no interest in such work. Instead, each of them wanted to know the reality behind the appearance of himself and everything else. So they began to wander in search of a guru who could teach them the nature of reality and the means to attain it. Continuing this search for many years, they grew old, but still they did not find the guru they were looking for, until one day they saw a teenage boy seated under a banyan tree. And as soon as they saw him, they were attracted to him and recognized that he was the guru they had been looking for. Approaching him, they did 3 pradakshinas, circumambulations around him, prostrated to him, and, sitting at his feet, began to ask him questions. Because of his Vatsalya, this is how Bhagavan described it, because of his Vatsalya means the affectionate love of a parent for their child. So Bhagavan said, because of his Vatsalya for his elderly disciples, the young Dakshinamurti was happy to see how wise and deep their questions were. So he answered each of them. For each of his answers, they asked a suitable follow-up question, seeking ever deeper clarity from him. So their questioning and his answering went on in this way for a year, progressively becoming deeper and subtler, until finally he saw that he had answered enough of their questions, because if he continued replying to them, there would be no end to the questions they could ask him. But their ignorance in the form of ego, the false awareness I am this body, would not thereby be destroyed. Therefore, curbing the Vatsalya that had till then been welling up in his heart, he merged back in his Mona Swarupa, that's in his real nature, which is silence. And as soon as he merged, by the power of his silence, they too merged into silence, finding it to be their own real nature, Swarupa. Hearing Bhagavan narrate the story of Dakshinamurti in this way, Muruganar was wonderstruck and remarked that in the Puranas, there's no mention of Dakshinamurti answering questions, to which Bhagavan replied, no, but this is what actually happened. As Muruganar said when talking about this many years later, Bhagavan was able to describe what happened so clearly and in so much detail because he is the same Lord Shiva who had in ancient times appeared in the form of Dakshinamurti to quench the spiritual thirst of the Sanakadi rishis. Since even Dakshinamurti could not enable his extremely pure-hearted and spiritually ripe disciples to know the reality just by teaching them with words, but only by silence, in this verse Bhagavan asks rhetorically, Vindidu vilakidu viralorubona, vindile panduni vilakede endral. Who has the power to elucidate this by speaking, when in ancient times even you as Dakshinamurti elucidated it without speaking? Likewise, in verse 5 of Ekatma Panchakam, he says, Epodum uludu av Ekatma vastuve. Apodu av vastuve adi guru sepadu seppi teriyama sedanarel eva seppi terivipa seppu. That means what always exists is only that ekatma vastu. Ekatma vastu means the one self-substance, namely ourself, the one real substance. If at that time the Adi Guru made that vastu known, speaking without speaking, say who can make it known speaking? What he made it known by speaking without speaking. Speaking without speaking means by silence. Who can make it known by speaking? Like Bhagavan often he says sepadu seppi. That means speaking without speaking. Bhagavan often used these seemingly contradictory terms, speaking without speaking, doing without doing, but it has a very deep meaning. Speaking without speaking means, without speaking implies silence, but by his silence he communicated, he revealed to them, he turned their mind within to make them see their own reality as that same silence. When Bhagavan composed Ekatma-vivekam, the Kalivemba version of Ekatma Panchakam, by linking the 5 verses together as one, between the 4th verse and this one, he added the phrase Tanadoliyal, which is a euphonic fusion of Tanadu Oliyal, by its own light. So with the addition of this phrase, the first sentence of this verse was extended as Tanadoliyal epodum uludu av ekatma vastube. What always exists by its own light is only that ekatma vastu, in which ekatma vastu is a Tamil form of the Sanskrit ekatma vastu, the one self-substance, which implies ourself as we actually are, which is the one real substance. Since this ekatma vastu is the only thing that exists always and by its own light, it alone is what is real, meaning that it alone is what actually exists. As Bhagavan wrote explicitly in the first sentence of the 7th paragraph of Nana, Yatartamai uludu Atma Sarupa Mondre. What actually exists is only Atma Sarupa, in which Atma Sarupa means the real nature of oneself, in the sense ourself as we actually are. So it is a synonym for ekatma vastu. Since this ekatma vastu alone is what actually is, it is what we always actually are, even when we seem to have risen as ego. However, as ego, we're aware of ourselves as I am this body, which is not what we actually are. So it is only by being aware of ourselves as we actually are that we can eradicate this false awareness called ego. In order to be aware of ourselves as we actually are, all we need to do is to turn our entire attention back within to face ourselves alone. But what prevents us doing so is our Vishaya vasanas, our intense liking for and interest in experiencing things other than ourselves, namely Vishayas, objects of phenomena. And we have so much liking to experience them because they are the food that nourishes and sustains our semi-existence as ego, and on which ego therefore depends for its very survival. all Vishayas are noise because they appear as disturbances, albeit seeming disturbances, in the infinitely, eternally, and immutably calm space of pure being awareness, which is the Ekatma Vastu. And the root of all such noise is the first noise, namely our rising as ego. So silence is the state in which ego, the thought called I, does not ever rise at all, even to the slightest extent. As Bhagavan pointed out in the second half of the sixth paragraph of Nana, the meaning of what I won't read the Tamil, I'll read just the English meaning. The name Ahamukam, facing inside or facing I, and Ahamukam, Antamukam, facing inside, is only for keeping the mind in the heart. Keeping mind in the heart means keeping one's mind or attention fixed firmly on the fundamental awareness I am, which is the core or heart of ego, the conflated awareness I am this body. So the definition he gives there of ahamukam or antamukam is keeping the mind in the heart, or keeping the mind on the heart, keeping our attention facing inward, without letting it go out. In other words, without letting it go out towards Vishayas. The name Bahemukam, facing outwards, is only for letting it go out from the heart. Only when the mind remains firmly fixed in the heart in this way will what is called I, named ego, which is the moolam, the root or foundation, for all thoughts, depart, and oneself, who always exists, alone shine. Only the place where the thought called I, namely ego, does not exist even a little is Swarupa, our real nature. That alone is called Mauna, silence. The name Jnana Drishti, knowledge seeing, is only for just being in this way. What just being Summa Irupadu is only making the mind dissolve in Atma-swarupa. So here Bhagavan clearly says silence is that state in which I does not rise. This I or ego, the rising of ego, as I said, metaphorically speaking, it's the first noise from which all other noise comes, noise in the form of all these phenomena. So silence is that state of just pure being. As Bhagavan explained, words arise from thoughts, thoughts arise from ego, and ego arises from ourself as we actually are, namely Atma-swarupa, whose very nature is infinite silence. So words derive their power from thoughts, thoughts derive their power from ego, and ego derives its power from the silence of our own infinite being. Words are therefore the great-grandchildren of silence, as he humorously put it. So though they can point us back to what we actually are, in the sense they can enable us to understand the way to return to it, they do not by themselves have the power to make us aware of ourselves as we actually are. What has the power to do so is only silence, because silence alone is what we actually are. Though this one infinite silence of pure being is always shining in our heart as our fundamental awareness I am, we seem to be not aware of it as it is, as it actually is, because of our love to be aware of other things, which appear in our view only when we rise and stand as ego, the false awareness I am this body, whose nature is to always face outwards, grasping form, as he puts it in verse 25 of Śrī. Therefore, because of our lack of love to turn within, to be aware of ourselves alone, thereby ceasing to be aware of anything else whatsoever, it is necessary for silence to appear outside in the form of Guru in order to teach us to turn within, in order not only to teach us to turn within, but also to make clear to us why we need to turn within. In other words, he shows us the way and gives us the motivation to follow the path. Though Guru generally appears in human form, as it has done by appearing in the form of Bhagavan Ramana, its primary teaching is silence, which does not require a human form. So it has also appeared in the form of Aruṇācala to teach us in silence, as Bhagavan points out in the final line of this verse. Vindida dunnile vilakida vendre, vindala machalama vilangida nindrai. Only to elucidate or make clear your nature without speaking, you stood shining as this sky-earth hill. Vindalam Achalam, sky-earth hill, implies not only a hill standing between sky and earth, but also a hill that transcends the boundary between the infinite space of pure awareness, metaphorically described as the sky, and this material world, metaphorically described as the earth, thereby serving as a bridge by which we can cross over from the material nature of our present state of embodiment to our real nature as pure awareness. So these terms Bhagavan uses, they're very simple terms, but they have very deep implication. Unnile, your nature or your state, implies what Aruṇācala actually is, namely infinite being awareness, Satyam Jnanam Anantam, which is eternally motionless, Achala, and hence perfect silence, Mona. So it is ultimately through silence, which is speaking without speaking, that he elucidates or makes this clear to us. Infinite being awareness is not only what Aruṇācala actually is, but also what we actually are. So he makes his real nature clear to us by making us be aware of ourselves as we actually are. It is only to make his real nature clear to us in this way that Lord Shiva appeared on earth in the form of Aruṇācala. So Aruṇācala is God in his ultimate role as Guru. As Bhagavan says explicitly in verse 19 of Aksharamulai, Kutramutraritane Gunamai Panital Guru Vuru Vayole Aruṇācala. Aruṇācala, who shine as the form of Guru, eradicating defects completely, making me as virtue, take charge. That's the literal meaning of the verse. Kutra Mutru Arutu, eradicating defects completely, implies eradicating all defects, including ego, which is the original defect and the root of all other defects, the seeds of which are ego's Vishaya vasanas, inclinations to seek happiness in Vishayas, objects or phenomena. Ene gunamai panital, making me as guna, implies making me be endowed with every guna, virtue or good quality, especially sadguna, the ultimate virtue of just being as we actually are without ever rising as ego, even to the slightest extent. And all, take charge, implies take charge of me or take complete possession of me as your very own, so that I may never again fall prey to the evil demon ego, Peyahande, and its horde of Vishaya vasanas. These three, namely eradicating ego and all its defects, making us endowed with Sadguna, and thereby taking complete charge of us, are the function of Guru. And Aruṇācala accompanies them all by making its real nature, which is what we actually are, clear to us by the silent power of its grace. Since Aruṇācala shines as the form of Guru, taking complete charge of us in this way by eradicating ego and thereby making us be as we actually are, is its duty and responsibility, as Bhagavan says in verse 14 of Śrī Aruṇācala Aṣṭakam. Auve polenakun arle tandane alu vadungadan Aruṇācala. Aruṇācala, like a mother, giving your grace to me, take charge of me. Taking charge of me is your duty or obligation or responsibility. So it's his responsibility to bestow his grace and thereby take charge of us. Aral grace is the infinite love by the silent power of which what we actually are is made clear to us. So, Enaku un arale tandu, giving your grace to me, implies lovingly making us aware of ourselves as we actually are, thereby eradicating ego. And this is the means by which Aruṇācala takes charge or complete possession of us. This ultimate aral sale, or act of grace, that Aruṇācala does silently in our heart, is the sale, doing or action that he referred to when he exclaimed in the first line of the previous verse, Amma adisayam idin sale arivaridakum. Its action is adisayam. It's extraordinary, wonderful, difficult for anyone to know or understand or appreciate. God is said to have 5 functions, panchakritiyas, namely creation, shrishti, sustenance, sthiti, dissolution, samhara, hiding, tirubhava or veiling, tirudhana, and grace, anugraha. And as Bhagavan says in the 15th paragraph of Nana, all these happen isan sanidana visesha matratal, by just the special nature of the presence of God, thereby implying that he does all these without actually doing anything, but just by being as he always actually is. The first 3 of these divine functions, namely creation, sustenance, and dissolution of the entire world, happen only in the view of ourself as ego. And we could not rise or stand as ego if we knew ourselves as we actually are. So the 4th function, namely hiding, veiling, or concealing what we actually are, is like the darkness in a cinema, without which no picture, no creation, sustenance, or dissolution could be projected on the screen. Therefore, so long as we as ego have any liking or desire to experience vishayas, objects or phenomena, God, who is what we actually are, keeps himself hidden from our view under a veil, namely the veil of our self-ignorance, avidya or ajnana, which is ego itself, the false awareness, I am this body. So that's why that veiling is the 4th of the 5 functions, because without the veiling, there would be no creation, sustenance, or dissolution. However, even when we're enveloped in this veil of ignorance, his grace is always working in our heart, gradually purifying our mind, and thereby giving us the clarity to want with increasing intensity to subside and thereby surrender ourselves completely to him. And at the same time, it is allotting the fruits of our good and bad actions, karmas, in such a way that will be most conducive to this process of purification, the ultimate aim of which is to make us aware of what we actually are, thereby removing the veil of our self-ignorance. This subtle and silent working of his grace is the last of his 5 functions, panchakritiyas, and it is in his role as Guru that he performed this function. So the role of Guru is the ultimate role of God. In the form of Aruṇācala, and equally in the form of Bhagavan Ramana, God is playing his ultimate role as Guru. Though as Aruṇācala he appeared in the form of a mountain, and though as Bhagavan he appears in human form, what he actually is neither a mountain nor a human being, but only the one infinite and therefore formless space of pure being awareness, Sat-Chit. Nevertheless, these outward forms of his are embodiments of his grace, so they fulfill an extremely important function in the process of his grace, turning our attention back within to make us see what remains when the seer has become completely non-existent. When we rise and stand as ego, we're aware of ourselves as I am this body. So we are not aware of ourselves as the formless reality that we actually are. And by no act of our mind can we conceive that formless reality. Therefore, until we turn our entire mind back within to face ourself alone, thereby merging forever in our own formless being, the outward forms of God or Guru serve a valuable function as supports for us to cling to whenever our mind comes out, as he points out in the next verse, which I'll talk about next time. Sorry, that was very, very long, but there's so much deep, deep meaning and implication in each of these verses of Aruṇācala Aṣṭakam. So there's so much implication we can draw out of them. The more we allow our mind to dwell on these verses of Bhagavan, the more they will reveal to us their deep inner meaning and implication. Does anyone have any questions about this verse or about what I tried to explain about its implication?
Yeah, Rati has a question. Rati?
Yes, Michael, I think you've been so this was such a wonderful exposition that, I mean, I almost have to feel that I'm abiding as Dakshinamurti, or eternal, unchangeable, immutable awareness in listening to you through the whole discussion. It's just been immersing, and there was no question even left there. However, I was going to just add, isn't it not like, although, I mean, when of course you say we don't arise as an object, a vishaya, to say I've seen, kandrain, or to see, or I've seen or witnessed or anything like that, but the seeing subsides into the merging, into the pure being as Satchidananda, as Aruṇācala, Achalam, the Achalam within us. That is true. And only when you abide in the Achalam, that is the experience of pure grace, because as Achalam, we experience the Arul Shayal, as you mentioned. However, would you also say somewhere Bhagavan has also mentioned about the mirror, that is, we are that mirror, the metaphor being that we are that mirror of when you rise as a form, we are that mirror of Aruṇācalam, or as a person, or we arise as something, to arise even as Dakshinamurti now, or even as Lord Shiva is rising as a form. But we are really underlying all that. We are that formless, nameless, immutable being, and we don't rise as any of that. And when more we let go of our ego, and the more although ego is that bridge, I mean, when you use the word bridge, I think you were referring to the ego there, because ego is that, what you call it, that conflated awareness, adjunct conflated awareness. So when you let go of that ego to really abide in the self, then you are that eternal, unchangeable being, immutable being, the pure Satchidananda or Dakshinamurti himself. And there's no need to speak at all. Silence is the ultimate teaching, and silence is so beautiful. And just what Bhagavan himself is silence. Because even when he only spoke to give us these beautiful teachings, but ultimately he was just embodied that silence and the beauty of Satchitananda, and that is what the Swayam Prakasha that we all really are, right, Michael?
That is, that silence appeared in the human form of Bhagavan, because we cannot understand the silent teaching that is eternally going on in our heart. That silence appeared outwardly in the form of Bhagavan Ramana to give these teachings in words, to direct us to turn within, to see the silence that we actually are. Yes. And when I mentioned about bridge, the context in which I mentioned about bridge was when he describes Aruṇācala as Vintala Achala, that is the sky, earth, hill. What I pointed out there is we can take it in a grosser sense to mean it's a hill that's between the earth and the sky. It's reaching up towards from the earth, it's reaching up towards the sky. That's an ordinary way of taking it, but we can take it in a much deeper sense, the vin, the sky, is a metaphorical description of the pure awareness that we actually are. And talam, the earth, is a metaphorical description of our material nature as an embodied being. So he provides the bridge from which we, actually is the bridge which enables us to cross over from this material nature to our real nature as pure awareness. That was the context in which I mentioned the bridge. I wasn't saying ego is the bridge, but Aruṇācala is the bridge enabling us to return to our, over which we can use as a means to return to our real nature. I was talking metaphorically, obviously.
I see. So it's the bridge is the sky earth phenomenon of Aruṇācala as the hill,
Yeah.
and our pure
But
Akasha.
not literally, not the literal sky or literal earth. They have a metaphorical implication.
Metaphorically speaking, yes, metaphorically speaking. And that Akasha is that pure space, which is infinite space. Yeah.
The space of pure awareness, which is what Aruṇācala actually is and what we actually are.
Yes, yes, beautiful. Thank you. Very moving and absolutely wonderful. Om Namo Bhagavate Śrī Aruṇācala.
It's all Bhagavan's words only.
Oh, beautiful. I mean, one can cry and one can sob at the beauty of this. It's so infinitely beautiful because our own inner nature is that infinitely beautiful. If you're only to abide in it, if you're only willing to let go of this pesky ego, which is always rising and saying, I am this, I am that, and I'm so and so, and I'm the body, can let go of I'm the body, then everything is there for us to experience and to be, to not experience, but really just to be, just remain and to be. Well, thank you, Michael.
Right.
I think there's another question which relates to your talk, it seems. I'll read it out anyway. It's from Nuno Lopez. I would like to ask something to Michael on a remark he made about the investigation. So I'm taking that it relates to your talk.
Yes.
Yes, thanks, Christopher. Hello, Michael. In some point on your explanation, you were saying the investigation being about the beingness, but in terms of practice of the investigation, what I'm investigating, it's actually the wrong I that I perceive myself to be, right? Because what I'm investigating is the snake, to see that the snake does not exist, and what is the rope, right? Or am I getting this wrong?
Even when you look at the snake, what are you actually looking at? You're looking.
Well,
it seems to be a snake, but when you look at it carefully enough, you see, oh, it's not a snake; it's just a rope. So the snake and the rope are not two different things. There's only one thing there, it's a rope, but it seems to be a snake. Likewise, ego and our real nature are not two different things. Our real nature is what we actually are. Ego is what we seem to be, but it's not a different, there aren't two eyes.
But me being the ignorant I, what I'm investigating is this ignorant I.
Yes, well, that's like saying what I'm looking at is a snake. Yes, it seems to be a snake, so long as you don't look at it carefully enough. When you look at it carefully enough, you'll see what you were looking at all along was only the rope.
But in that case, in that point in time, let's say like this, it finishes the investigation. That's not required investigation anymore because I know who I am. But now I don't know who I am. Right?
That's why Bhagavan, this first line of the verse is so carefully worded. Bhagavan said when investigating who is the seer means ego.
The subject.
the subject, yes. But when he investigated the seer, what he saw is what remained when the seer was
When the
completely
subject
non-existent.
subsides.
Yeah. That's like saying when looking carefully at the snake, I saw what remained when the snake
It
no
was the
longer
rope.
existed, because it's what remains is what was always there, the rope.
Yeah.
But that's just an analogy. In this case, that is, if we look at a snake and carefully enough and see that it's a rope, we're still something separate from that. But in this case, it's not that. Now we experience ourselves as the seer. So when we investigate who is the seer, we're investigating ourselves. And then we see what we actually are. When we cease to be the seer and remain as we always actually are, that's what Bhagavan means by saying, I saw what remains when the seer was non-existent, completely non-existent.
Okay.
So Bhagavan's words are so, in his poetry, he's crafted these, though it poured forth spontaneously, but when we see the result of what poured forth, we can see how very Bhagavan didn't put any thought into doing this. These words came spontaneously because they came not from a mind, they came from the silence itself. So it came out in such a perfect form.
Yeah.
That's why the Bhagavan's words are not ordinary words.
But my question was just in the follow-up of the practical practice of the Atma-vichara, that I'm investigating the seer, and in some point in time, this seer will be seen as some non-existent thing, and it will remain.
You'll see the seer as the only existent thing, not as the seer, but as what always actually exists.
Okay.
That is this path of vichara is a very simple practice, but it's also very deep and subtle. So having a very clear understanding, it's necessary to go deep in this path. We can begin with a rather vague understanding, but in order to go deeper, we need a deeper and clearer understanding. And one of the most important things to understand is that there are not two eyes. The eye that we're investigating, though we now experience it as ego, as the seer, what it actually is only that pure awareness. That is why in the Upanishads, they talk, Tattvamasi, you are that.
Yeah.
That is, Bhagavan refers to, when in the second verse of Aruṇācala Navammanimalai, he says, Tattvamasi, the meaning of which is Jiva Brahmaikya. He doesn't quite use those words. He uses Tamil terms, Paravui Sarayakam, but that refers to Jiva Brahmaikya. Jiva Brahmaikya, Aikya means oneness. The oneness of Jiva and Brahman, they're not two different things.
Yeah, it's
Jiva is ego.
In one of the books that you translated, where you very simple, where you say "E is I," which is something that I cannot see it, of course, but it's quite simple. There is one without a second.
We
being Aruṇācala or God or Ramana Maharshi in this case.
We may not be able to see it clearly now, but it's very important to understand that he is I. There's no he other than I.
That is quite difficult for me.
Yeah, but we can at least, to the extent possible, we need to first, the understanding begins at a conceptual level. Then only by practice it will go deeper and become clearer. But we need to at least have a clear conceptual understanding. If we don't have a clear conceptual understanding of what we're doing, we're going to be investigating the wrong thing. So having a clear understanding is very, very important. That is the the fruit to be gained from Bhagavan's words, to get a clear understanding. That clear understanding will then enable us to go deep in the practice.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Thanks, Michael. Thank you very much.
So, Michael, now we've got an email that came in earlier.
Yes.
Which I'll read out before we get on to the actual questions
Yes.
from people today. So this is from Swami Nivritananda ji. Namaskaram, Michael. The 11th verse of Gaudabada's Karika on the chapter on illusion, Mandukya Upanishad, raises the following question. If the objects cognized in both the conditions of dream and of waking be illusory, who cognizes all these illusory objects and who again imagines them? The 12th verse of the Karika says in answer, Atman, the self-luminous, through the power of his own Maya, imagines in himself, by himself, all the objects that the subject experiences within or without. He alone is the cognizer of the object so created. That is the decision of Vedanta. And so then he says, what's the clarification to this 12th verse from the standpoint of Bhagavan's teachings? Apparently, there seems to be a contradiction between this 12th verse and Bhagavan's teachings. Is it that the Atman, the pure being itself, rises, appears as the ego and imagines all this? But this is categorically denied by the 24th verse of Aladu Napadu, where Bhagavan says that Satchit Atman doesn't rise. I'm aware that Bhagavan's teachings don't contradict with what either Adi Shankara says or Gaudapada says, but rather enhances them and fulfills them and helps us to understand the practical implications of what they are saying. So that's it.
Yes, this is true. Bhagavan's teachings, Bhagavan is clarifying what is said by Gaudapada, what is said by Adi Shankara. There are so many things we can point out that Bhagavan has said that seem to be if seen superficially, can be taken to be contradicting what's said. For example, in the Upanishads it is said that the analogy of the spider spinning out the thread from within itself and drawing it back in, this analogy is used, and it is said that Brahman has projected the world and Brahman will absorb the world back into itself. But in the 4th paragraph of Nana, Bhagavan has said, Bhagavan uses the same analogy and says it's the mind that projects the world and absorbs it back into itself. So is this a contradiction? No. Because what we need to understand from Bhagavan's clarification is that Brahman as Brahman doesn't project anything. Brahman is just pure being. It's only as ego or mind that it projects all this and absorbs it back into itself. Likewise, it is said in Chandogya Upanishad, Sarvam Kalvidam Brahma. All this is undoubtedly or verily Brahman. But in Ulladu verse 26, Bhagavan says, Ahandeya Yavamam. Ego itself is everything. So the Upanishads say everything is Brahman. Bhagavan says everything is ego. Is it a contradiction? No. Bhagavan is again clarifying. That is, everything, that is what he says in verse 26 is, if ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. Note that he doesn't say when ego comes into existence. He says if ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. There's a underlying implication there but ego never actually comes into existence. But it seems to have come into existence. As soon as we rise as ego, everything else appears. So if ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. Ego itself is everything. So what he makes clear is all phenomena, all vishayas, everything that appears, it appears in whose view? Only in the view of ego. So all phenomena are just an expansion of ego. That is, we as ego are seeing ourselves as this universe with all these multitude of phenomena, just like in a dream. What we are seeing as a dream world, we are seeing ourselves as that dream world, the dream body, the dream world, all the dream people, everything in the dream is nothing but ourselves. We're seeing as all that. Likewise, as ego, we see ourselves as all this. So everything is only ego. But if ego investigates itself, what does it find? But it is nothing but Brahman. So everything is ultimately only Brahman. But the Bhagavan clarifies it by introducing what is in between all these phenomena and Brahman, so to speak. Of course, there's nothing in between it because Brahman alone exists. But metaphorically speaking, the go-between between the phenomena and the underlying reality is ego. Without ego, none of these things appear. So it is ego that has projected this world. It is ego that sees itself as everything. But if ego investigates itself, it finds it's nothing but Brahman. So it is Brahman in the form of ego who has projected this world like a spider spinning out the web from within itself and drawing it back into itself. Likewise here, in this case, this is again a place where Bhagavan's teachings clarify what is meant here. Here we need to be very careful when we come across the word Atman. Many people assume when they see the word Atman that it automatically refers to Atma-swarupa. In other words, Atman as it actually is. But what Atman actually means is oneself. To put it in another way, people generally take Atman to be a noun. It is better if we understand it to be a pronoun. A noun refers to something particular. A pronoun, what it refers to depends on the context. So the word Atman means oneself. It can, in some cases, it refers to Atma-swarupa, what we actually are. In some cases, it refers to ego. So we need to distinguish where it refers to ego, where it refers to ourselves as we actually are, and where it doesn't matter. For example, in the term Atma-vichara, does Atma refer to Atma-swarupa or does it refer to ego? It doesn't matter because they're one and the same thing. So we need to understand that there are not two selves. There's only one self, one Atman. That Atman that now appears in the form of ego is, even when it appears in the form of ego, it's actually nothing but Brahman. So when it is said here, Atman, through the power of his own Maya, that Gaudapada gives us a clue there by saying by Maya. As soon as the word Maya is there, what is this Maya? Bhagavan has made it clear, Maya is nothing but mind. So when it said through the power of its own Maya, I think actually in the verse, wait a second, I'll just get the original verse. I don't even think the word even the word power is not there. What is there is svamaya. It means by its own Maya. So by its own Maya, that means what that implies is it's not Atman as Atman, not ourself as we actually are, that has projected, that imagines all this and sees it all. It is only as the mind, as ego, but we have created all this. They use the word imagine here. The word in the verse is, I think, kalpaya. That means it's a fabrication. It's a mental fabrication. It's a mental creation. So it is it is ourself as ego that has created all this and that is seeing all this. Just like in a dream, the one who is dreaming is also the one who is seeing the dream. That is creating the dream and seeing the dream are one and the same, because the deepest teaching, or in this regard, is what Bhagavan pointed out, which is drishti shrishti vada, that there's no creation other than seeing. So when we project this world, we project it in our own awareness. So the projecting of it and the perceiving of it are one and the same thing. They're not two separate things. It's not that first the world is created and then we see it. No, our seeing the world is itself creating the world. That the world has no, just like in a dream. The dream world isn't first created and then we see it. We create it by our very act of seeing. So this is what is happening. And it's all by Maya, which is nothing but the mind. So here Atman means it's not what we actually are that has created all this. It's Atman in association with Maya, which is what is called mind, is what creates all this. So we can take Atman here. We can either say it's referring to Atman as we actually are, but in association with Maya, therefore it equals mind. Or we can say Atman here doesn't refer to what we actually are, it's referring to ego, which alone is what has the power of Maya. But Maya is only for ego, there's the power of Maya. For Atman itself, there's no such thing as Maya at all. There's just Atman in its pure condition. There's also a word here, well, in the translation, it says Atman was self-luminous. But actually what's there in Gaudapada's verse, the word that he uses for luminous is Deva. Atma Deva. Deva means what shines, the shining one. But the translator, I think it's Nikhilananda's translation you're referring to, he's translated it as the self-luminous. And Gambhirananda also, I checked his translation, he's also translated as self-luminous. I don't know what actually, both in the verse and in the Bhashya, what word Shankara used in the Bhashya, whether he uses the word Swayam Prakasha or not, I don't know. But generally, Swayam Prakasha, self-luminous, refers to our real nature. Whether we can call ego self-luminous, it depends how we take it. Ego is not self-luminous in the sense that the light by which ego is shining is a light that it borrows from Atma-swarupa, from what we actually are, from the pure awareness that we actually are. So the pure awareness is self-luminous. The ego, the adjunct conflated awareness, is not self-luminous in that sense. But we can also say, since this ego is actually nothing other than Atma-swarupa, we can also take it as self-luminous. So there are various ways we can interpret it. As I say, clearly in the verse, there's no word that explicitly means self-luminous. It's simply Devaha. Devaha means shining, the shining one. So Atma is even ego is shiny. It shines as if by its own light, but actually the light by which it's shining is the light that it derives from its reality, from what it actually is, which is pure awareness. So in the light of Bhagavan's teaching, a very simple way to interpret this verse is that Atman here refers to ourselves as ego. And we are shining as ego, and through this ego, which is the power of Maya, we see ourselves by ourselves as all these phenomena. We have created all this, and we see it and create it simultaneously. Is that a clear explanation?
Yeah, thank you very much, Michael. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Do you have any further questions?
That is the only way you can reconcile the question. I answered the question actually.
Yes, yes.
And I have two more short questions I have.
Yes, please.
What exactly is Sri Ramana Padamalai?
Ramana Padamalai, it's their verses composed by Muruganar. That is, at the time Muruganar passed away, there were more than 14,000 unpublished verses. But Sadhu Om had been working with Muruganar for many, many years. Sadhu Om took it upon himself to preserve all of Muruganar's verses as much as possible. Obviously, he couldn't preserve everything. Muruganar often used to write his verses just on a slate. So he'd write one verse on one side. When the next verse comes to him, he turns the slate over, writes on the other side. If another verse comes to him, he erases the first verse and writes another verse. So Sadhu Om was meticulously copying, was visiting Muruganar every day, copying everything, collecting everything, collecting all the papers, cataloging them, arranging them into different groups. And he compiled a 9-volume work called Ramana Bodham out of these 14,000 verses. Many of the verses were just individual verses, but Ramana Padamalai was written as a series of verses, so it wasn't so there wasn't any editing to be done on that. They didn't have to be arranged in order like most of the other verses. But in that Ramana Padamalai, Muruganar, many of the verses end with en padam. En there means implies thus said padam. Padam, which means feet, is referring to Bhagavan. So in many of the verses, he's quoting the teachings of Bhagavan. So Padamalai consists mainly of sayings of Bhagavan, but Muruganar has expressed in the form of of verses.
Something similar to Guruvachaka Kovai.
Something similar, but it wasn't. Yes, I mean, but it wasn't similar. In the sense that it is Bhagavan's sayings, but whereas Guruvachaka Kovai was deliberately a record of Bhagavan's oral sayings, this was Padamalai just poured forth from his heart. But when the poetry pours forth, it's full of Bhagavan's teachings, full of things he's heard Bhagavan say, or clarity that he got from Bhagavan. We can't even say that it's necessarily every verse where he says en padam, but he's quoting words that Bhagavan said, because Bhagavan, by his silence, made Muruganar understand many things, but he may not have said in words. So we can't say, whereas Guruvachaka Kovai is things that Bhagavan actually said verbally. In Padamalai, we cannot say, some of the things may be what Bhagavan actually said, other things may be what Bhagavan made Muruganar understand from within. We can't say definitely.
And my next question is, what is Sri Ramana Gita?
Ramana Gita or Ramana Gitam?
Ramana Gitam, which is supposed to have been composed by Kavyakantha Ganapati Muni.
No,
What is your opinion about that?
Ramana Gitam is a collection of songs by Sadhu Om on Bhagavan. hundreds of songs that Sadhu Om composed on Bhagavad. That's Ramana Geetam. Ramana Gita is a work composed by Kavyaganta in Sanskrit. It is
Is it
I'll tell you what I heard from Natyanananda, which gives throws some light on it. When Natyanananda first came to Bhagavan in 1918, the only works of Bhagavan were a few translated works like Viveka Charamani, which Bhagavan had translated, and Devi Kalotram, which Bhagavan had translated, and a few Akshram might have been composed by that time. Navamani Malai, some of the verses of Navamani Malai. Navamani Malai wasn't completed until 1928 or so. Pancharatnam had been composed. Aṣṭakam and Patikam and Aṣṭakam have been composed. This was all that was available of Bhagavan's own writings in those days. Nana, nobody knew about. That wasn't published till 1923, though the questions had been asked many years earlier. So when Natyanananda came to Bhagavan in 1918, it wasn't very clear what Bhagavan's teachings were. For a newcomer, there wasn't some, you weren't just able to pick up Nana and read it and understand what Bhagavan's teachings is. There was almost nothing available. But there was this verse that had this work that had recently been composed in Sanskrit called Ramana Gita. And all the followers of Kavyaganta were praising it. This is the essence of, this is like Bhagavad Gita, this is Ramana Gita, this is all Bhagavan's teachings are composed in, this is a very important work. So Natyanananda didn't know Sanskrit, so he felt a bit left out. So he asked Bhagavan, he said, Bhagavan, I'm not able to understand Sanskrit, but Bhagavan, everyone says this Ramana Gita is the most important work, contains all your teachings and everything. Can you explain to me the meaning? And Bhagavan just laughed and said, oh, it's nothing. 1 or 2 years ago, they approached me with a series of questions, but their aim was to pull me down. My aim was to lift them up. So they asked questions with a certain motive. The answers were according to it. But however much I tried to pull them up, I couldn't pull them up because they didn't want to come up. They wanted to go down. I mean, they wanted to pull me down to their level. So, but finally, so it was a failure. Kavyaganta didn't achieve what he wanted, which was to get Bhagavan's approval for his own ideas. So Bhagavan said, just like in a circus, an acrobat may be walking on a tightrope high up and slip. Rather than showing it as an accident, he'll do a double somersault and land on the net as if it was part of the show. So rather than admitting that they failed in their attempt, Kavyaganta composed Ramana Gita, in which he included some of the things that I said. Not the Bhagavan implied, not the most important things he said, but the things that suited them, they included. That's why Ramana Gita contains chapters on Shakti and Siddhis and society, all these things, which are not Bhagavan's teachings. Yes, there's a little bit on Atma-vichara. There is a chapter on Atma-vichara. So some teachings of Bhagavan are there, but most of them are not the real teachings of Bhagavan. They are what Bhagavan replied to their questions, which, as Bhagavan said, they were asked with a certain motive.
It's not so important that we need not go through it. It's not so important to read that book.
Just like we read all other books, we read talks, we read day by day. It's nice to read these things. We can get some useful things here and there. But we also have to be careful. The second chapter is about the verse Hridaya Gohara Madhye. But Kaviraganta has called that chapter the three paths. And he interprets this verse, but Bhagavan is teaching three different ways. Samchimvata, which is investigating oneself. Majjhita means
Yoga.
diving or subsiding or sinking. And Pavladacharana, controlling the movement of the breath. So he's taken it as three. But when Bhagavan later translated it into Tamil, he made it very clear that it's actually what Bhagavan was referring to was two things. Because Bhagavan says, Tannai Eniyal, subsiding with the investigating oneself or subsiding along with the breath. So Bhagavan was actually intended two paths there, but Kaviraganta has interpreted it as three paths. And of those two paths, one is not actually Bhagavan's path. Pavladacharana Roda is not a means to attain Atmanishta. The reason Bhagavan included it there is because Bhagavan, how Bhagavan came to compose that verse is that Jagadisha Sastri tried to compose a verse and he was having difficulty. So Bhagavan asked, he asked for Bhagavan's help or something. No, he didn't ask for Bhagavan's help. He was just struggling. Then Bhagavan asked, what are you trying to write? He told Bhagavan what he wanted to write, but then he wasn't able to complete it. Then he went out. When he came back, Bhagavan gave him a piece of paper on which Bhagavan had composed the verse, and underneath it he had written Jagadisan. So Bhagavan put Jagadisha's ideas in the form of a verse. But Jagadisha's idea, most of the ideas in that verse are Bhagavan's teaching, because it's what Jagadisha had learnt from Bhagavan. So the first half of the verse is pure teaching of Bhagavan. Hridaya Guhra Madhye Kevalam Brahma Matram Hyamaham Iti Atma Sakshat Atma Rupena Sakshat. I can't remember the exact verse, but first two lines is pure teaching of Bhagavan. Second two lines, half of it about Samchimvata, that's Bhagavan's teaching, subsiding because by investigating ourselves. Pavladacharana Roda is Jagadisha's idea. That's why that verse is not the pure teaching of Bhagavan. Though a lot of it is a very beautiful expression of Bhagavan's teaching.
Yeah, thank you, Michael.
So for Bhagavan, there's just one path. That one path we can call Atma-vichara, we can call Atma-samarpanam. It's one and the same path. Because the means by which we can surrender ourselves completely is only by Atma-vichara. As Bhagavan makes clear in the first sentence of the 13th paragraph of Nana. But giving oneself...
When Bhagavan asks us to hold on to I am, it means we have to abide as I am, right?
Holding on to I am means attending to I am. By attending to I am, we as ego subside and remain as I am. Yeah. So just like Sat is Chit, Chit is Sat, attending to ourself is being ourself. Being ourself is, as he says in verse 26 of Upadeshundya, Tanai iritle, Tanai aritlam. Being oneself alone is knowing oneself. So we can, attending to ourself and being ourself are one and the same thing, because to the extent to which we attend to ourself, we as ego subside and remain as our being. So self-attention and self-abidance are one and the same thing. Yeah, in Atma-vichara, we're investigating our being. The only way to investigate our being is by being as we actually are. And in order to be as we actually are, we need to attend to ourselves, because only by attending to ourselves will we subside and remain as we actually are.
Exactly. Yeah, thank you very much.
Right.
Aruṇācala.
Aruṇācala.
Okay, Michael, the next question is from someone who's called Home.
How should we understand the concept of Yoga-kshema used by Sri Krishna in Gita? Is Yoga-kshema some sort of spiritual protection given to the devotees of God or to spiritual aspirants in general? Thank you.
Okay. Generally, how it is explained is yoga means joining. So it's acquiring. So whatever we need, we will get. Kshamam means protecting. So it can be taken either in terms of worldly things or in terms of spiritual things. So if you approach God for if your worship of God is kamyata, all that he will take care of of what you already possess. Sorry, he will take care of what you need to acquire and what you already possess. But it's got a deeper meaning in the context in which Krishna is using it. What he's referring to is not the material things, not the worldly things, it's our spiritual things. So he will take care of everything that we need to acquire and also what we've already acquired. So Kshamam is protecting what we've already acquired. Yoga is enabling us to acquire what we need, but not as I say, it can be taken. Many people take it in terms of material things, but the deeper meaning is the spiritual things. So all the love to turn within and other good qualities that we are seeking to acquire, we will gain those. And what we've already acquired by his grace, he will take care of those. So in other words, he'll take care of everything. All our spiritual needs will be taken care of by him.
Is it some special care, or it's in general grace working?
It's grace working. Grace is always taking care of our yoga-kshemam. What we need, it provides for us. Yes. And what is it provided, it makes sure we don't slip down from that. So it's referring to the grace is taking care of all our needs. Mm-hmm. Even our material, primarily the aim of grace is to bring about the dissolution of ego. Mm-hmm. That is the ultimate aim of grace. Mm-hmm. But in the course of the path, all that is necessary along the path, it provides for us. Mm-hmm. In terms of spiritual help, also whatever material things are appropriate for us at our present stage of spiritual development, it will provide. Even if it takes things away from us, even if it gives us hardship, that's also part of a yoga-kshema, because he's taking care of everything. He knows better than we do what we need. So everything is taken care of by him.
Thank you, sir.
Right.
Thank you, sir.
So now we've got Sadashiva. When the temporary appearance of ego realizes permanent self, is it not natural to be grateful for the temporary appearance which was necessary to realize the permanent self?
No, because the temporary appearance, ego, is fit only for being destroyed. Ego can never realize what is real. As soon as ego recognizes itself as the one underlying reality, namely Atma-swarupa, it's pure being awareness, such it ceases to be ego and remains as that. So it's not ego as ego, we will never know ourselves as we actually are, because as soon as we know ourselves as we actually are, we cease to be ego and remain as we actually are. So this word realize is not a word that Bhagavan that really corresponds with Bhagavan's teachings. In fact, Bhagavan who generally, Bhagavan understood English to a considerable extent, but he very seldom spoke in English. But he occasionally he would speak in English where it was relevant to do so. So what he said about the term realization, he said, what is real is always real. So it doesn't need to be realized. The problem is, but we have now realized the unreal. So all we have to do is to unrealize the unreal, and the real alone will, to unrealize the unreal, and the real alone will remain. So this term, realization, self-realization, it doesn't really, it's not, it doesn't really convey Bhagavan's teachings very well. Bhagavan's teaching is that we need to know what we actually are. By knowing what we actually are, we thereby cease to be ego and remain as we actually are. So what people refer to as self-realization is what Bhagavan calls annihilation of manonasa, annihilation of mind, or eradication of ego. When ego is eradicated, what remains knows itself as it is. That's what he says in the first line of this verse. When I investigated who is the seer, I saw what remained when the seer ceased to exist. That implies that by investigating ego, the seer, ego will cease to exist, and what will remain will alone know itself. That is what we actually are. So ego is not at all useful. Ego is only obscure. Ego is what, it's because of ego that we seem to not know what we actually are. Of course, we always know ourselves, but now instead of knowing ourselves as we actually are, we know ourselves as I am this body. It's because it's ego that knows itself as I am this body. So long as we remain as ego, we are self-ignorant. When we know ourselves as we actually are, ego is thereby destroyed.
Sadashiva has followed up with, is it not temporary ego which does the investigation?
Yes, it is ego that does the investigation. As a result of the investigation, ego loses itself, and what always exists alone remains. That is, ego needs to do the investigation, because as ego we are aware of ourselves as something other than what we actually are. So we're not aware of ourselves as we actually are. We investigate ourselves in order to be aware of ourselves as we actually are. As soon as we're aware of ourselves as we actually are, we thereby cease to be ego.
We have to start from where we are.
Yeah, we have to start from where we are, but we don't gain anything as a result of ego, because what we actually are is always aware of itself as it actually is. There's no, it never undergoes any change whatsoever.
I see what, to express gratitude would have to come from the ego again. That's, I see what you're saying.
Ego needs to be grateful for the grace that will dissolve ego and eradicate ego entirely.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Right.
So now we have from Ilana. Is God the same as ego when described in the role creation/veiling scenario?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
Is God the same as ego when described in the role creation/veiling scenario?
No.
If ego creates everything by grasping form, is it what people describe as the creator God?
That is, no, ego is not God. That is, when we rise as ego, we limit ourselves. So what we actually are is infinite Satchidananda. But by rising as ego, we have seemingly limited ourselves as if we're just this small body, this little person. So long as we have seemingly separated ourselves, God, who is our own real nature, seems to be something other than ourselves. So as Bhagavan says, if oneself is a form, the world and God will also be likewise. So God seems to be a form, something other than ourselves, something distinct from ourselves, so long as we rise as ego. There are different levels of explanation. The most superficial explanation is that God has created this world. God has created this world, he's sustaining it, and eventually he'll destroy it, he'll dissolve it. And before starting the whole thing again and again, because the whole idea is that creation is a cyclical thing. It's created, it's sustained, it's destroyed. Again, it's created, sustained, destroyed. But all this creation, sustenance, and destruction occurs in whose view? Only in the view of ourself as ego. So the deeper teaching is that actually all this is just a projection of ego. We as ego have projected all this. We projected God as a seemingly separate entity, not the reality of God, because God is actually the reality of ego, the underlying reality of ego. But so long as we rise as ego, God seems to be something separate from ourselves. So as something separate, that is also part of ego's fabrication. And it also fabricates the appearance of the world. So the deeper teaching is that this creation, sustenance, and destruction all occurs only because of our rising as ego. So, but that doesn't mean ego is God. That would be confusing matters. So long as we rise as ego, God seems to be some higher power other than ourselves. So God is the one who is. We have made the mistake of projecting all this. God is then had the task of in order to save us, has to take control of our projection and make sure gives us the fruit of our karmas, which also part of our projection, but what we project is determined by God. But all this is not the ultimate truth. The ultimate truth is, if we investigate ourselves and see what we actually are, we will know that we have never risen as ego, and therefore there never was any creation, sustenance, destruction, or veiling. What is alone is grace. Grace is the eternal reality. That is what we actually are. That is what God actually is. So grace is the ultimate function. That's why I explained earlier, grace is the ultimate function of God. And it is God in the form of Guru, that is, it's as Guru, but God is God in his role of performing the ultimate function of grace. God is Guru. So it's as Guru, but God bestows grace. Grace in its real form, not grace but to fulfill all our desires, but the grace to eradicate the one who has all the desires. That is the true aim of grace. In that context, when talking of Shrishti, Sthiti, Samhara, Tirodhana, and Anugraha, the term used for grace is Anugraha. Anugraha has a very interesting etymology. Anu means to follow. Graha means to grasp. So the etymological meaning of Anugraha is God has to come running after us to grasp us and save us from ourselves. Just like if a child is playing out on the street, it's in danger of being hit by passing vehicles. So the mother or father has to run out and grasp it and pull it back and bring it back home. Like that, God has to come running after us in order to save us. That is the etymology, that's the reason for how that word anugraha came to mean grace. It's that saving power of God. So grace is the special responsibility of God in the form of Guru.
So the next one is from Pallavi Sinha. Is seer an ego that means the one who is the witness is our ego? I want to understand then how to go beyond the seer. Till now I was focusing on the one who is seeing.
The one who is seeing is the seer. That is ego. Regarding witness, it depends on the sense in which the term witness is used. As Bhagavan pointed out, the term witness is used in two senses. In one sense, witness is used to refer to ego, because ego is the seer, the knower. In another sense, Bhagavan said, the word for witness is sakshi. So he said sakshi means sanadi. That is, witness is presence. That is, when it is said that God or Brahman is the witness of all, it means that in the presence of Brahman that everything happens. Not the Brahman is seeing everything. Brahman is just being as it is. So it depends upon the sense in which the term witness is used. The reason the term witness is used, there's a deep reason for that. That is, as ego, we identify ourselves with these five sheaves. That's the body, mind, and the whole bundle. The body, life, mind, intellect, and will. These five are called the five sheaves. This is what we identify as I. But all these are objects known by us. So to help us to distinguish ourselves as the knower from everything that we know, we are told that we are not this body or mind. We are the witness of all these things. In other words, we are the knower of all these things. This is what is called drik drisya viveka, distinguishing the seer from the seen, the knower from the known, the subject from the objects. So, but why we distinguish ourselves is in order to investigate ourselves. If we do not distinguish ourselves from all the things that we mistake ourselves to be, when we try to investigate ourselves, we'll be trying to investigate the wrong thing. What we need to investigate is the seer, the knower, the one who is aware of all this. And as Bhagavan says in this verse, when we investigate who is the seer, who is the one who sees, we will see what remains when the seer becomes non-existent. That is, the implication is, by investigating the seer, namely ego, ego will subside and dissolve back into its source, and what will remain then is the underlying reality, which is the Satchit, the pure being awareness that we actually are. So in order to go beyond the seer, all we need to do is to investigate it. In other words, to turn our attention back towards ourself. Who am I who is seeing all this multiplicity? That's not asking the question. That means looking at ourselves to see what we actually are.
So the next question is, this fake I ego will merge into the real I self. Same like when river merges into an ocean, the river do not exist anymore, it is known as ocean only. This will come handy only if we do regular sadhana practice and follow rules of not consuming alcohol, smoking, meat, etc. Else the mind is always clogged with fake ego, I. So it's a statement, but I suppose it needs a comment, I guess.
Yes, that is, this ego will cease to exist only, well, ego subsides to the extent to which we attend to ourselves. So we need to be attending to ourselves more and more and more in order to bring about the subsidence of ego. So long as we if we're consuming alcohol, eating meat, all these things cloud the mind and make it more difficult for us to keep our attention fixed on ourselves. So if our aim is to keep our attention fixed on ourselves, we need to avoid all these non-sattvic foods, the foods that are not conducive to a calm and clear state of mind. These things cloud the mind and agitate the mind. And a clouded, agitated mind is not a suitable instrument for investigating ourselves.
So now Vasanta says, Dear Michael, am I correct to understand that when we turn inwards to do Atma-vichara, we are actually investigating ego, i.e. ego-vichara? Thank you.
Take your pick. You can understand it in either way, because there is only one I. So we are to investigate this one I. This one I now seems to be ego, because it's now mixed and conflated with adjuncts. But the more we attend to this I, the adjuncts drop off, and that I then shines as the pure I. In other words, the ego, which is the adjunct conflated I, subsides, and the underlying reality, the pure I, alone remains. So, are we, when Bhagavan asks us to look carefully at what's lying on the ground, are we investigating the snake or the rope? Take your pick. If it seems to you like to be a snake, then you're investigating, then you're looking carefully at the snake. If you understand from what Bhagavan has told, but though it seems to be a snake, it's actually a rope, then you can say, I'm investigating the rope to see it clearly. There's only one thing there. There's only one I for us to investigate, whether we call it ego or we call it Atma-swarupa. What seems to be ego is actually Atma-swarupa, just as what seems to be a rope is actually just what seems to be a snake is actually just a rope. Is that a clear enough answer?
Yes, thank you, Michael, because
Right.
I try to do my best, but all I can, when I turn inwards, or what you always advise, is this person, or not person, this individual I know as myself is the ego. So that's why the question I was asking is, are we doing ego vichara actually, instead of, because we can never know the Atma until the end.
Have you ever seen this thing called ego?
Have I?
Have you ever seen this thing called ego?
No, of course not.
What we are attending to is awareness.
Okay.
That awareness, so long as it's aware of things other than itself, it's called ego. That same awareness, when it's aware of itself alone, is called Atma-swarupa. So to the extent to which we attend to the awareness that we are, ego subsides and the awareness, the pure awareness alone remains.
Right.
They're not two different, they're not two different eyes, there are no two different awarenesses. But by attending to I alone, the adjuncts drop off. Because the thing is, these adjuncts are not holding on to us. We are holding on to the adjuncts.
Okay.
It's not Vasanta who's holding on to you. You are holding on to Vasanta and saying, I am Vasanta.
Right. Okay. So the answer
So,
will
but if
be,
you, instead of holding on to Vasanta, if you just hold on to I, Vasanta will drop off. I alone will remain.
so it's actually awareness vichara.
That's why Bhagavan calls it Jnana-vichara.
Yes.
Jnana means awareness.
When we say Atma-vichara, we think it's like somewhere in the distance. It's so difficult to even contemplate, you know, ever in this life. But
Yes.
with awareness vichara, I understand that.
Yes, yes. Well, that's Bhagavan in the first paragraph of Nana. There are two sentences. There's one long sentence in which he explains that it's necessary for oneself to know oneself, and then second sentence he says, "Adaku Nana endam jnana vicharame mukhya sadhanam." For that, the jnana vichara, the awareness investigation called "Who am I?" is the principal means.
Fine.
And again in Upadesha Undya, I think in verse 19, if I remember correctly, he says Jnana Vichara Midundipara. This is Jnana Vichara. This is awareness Vichara.
Yes. So if I can substitute the word Atma for awareness vichara, it's clearer somehow.
Yes, because the problem is we've mystified this word Atma. It's become something very mysterious.
Yes.
But there's nothing more obvious. Muruggana says in the Anupalavi of Atma-vichara, even for the dullest of people, there's nothing so clear as Atma. We all know ourselves. But the trouble is we built a mystery around this Atma, the Atma. Where is the Atma? How do I find the Atma? You yourself are that Atma. You always, what you refer to as I, that is Atma. There's no Atma other than I. Atma means yourself.
The only problem will come when we confuse awareness with mind.
Yes, but that is... mind, when we talk about mind, we need to be clear what we're talking about. That is, as Bhagavan clarifies in verse 18 of Upadesha Undya, what he says is, Ennangale manam, thoughts alone are the mind. So when we talk about mind, often we're talking about the totality of all thoughts. But of all these thoughts, the thought called I is the root. The thought called I is ego. That is the root. Why is it the root? Because all the other thoughts are objects. They're things known by I. So all other thoughts exist only in the view of ego. So what the mind essentially is ego. So when the term mind is used, we need to understand from a context whether it's referring to the totality of all thoughts or to the knower of all those thoughts.
Yes.
So Bhagavan often uses the term mind to refer to ego. And we can easily understand from the context when he talks about the mind knowing things, that the knowing element of the mind is ego. So ego is not other than awareness. That is, ego is chit jada granti. It's a knot formed by the conflation of chit, the awareness, and the adjuncts, the jada upadis, that is these five sheaves. The five sheaves are all jada. But that which is aware of all these five sheaths and which takes it to be I, that is ego. So ego is essentially just chit. But it's chit mixed and conflated with adjuncts. So we can't say the mind is totally devoid of awareness, because the essence of the mind is ego. And the essence of ego is awareness.
Yes.
So what we are investigating is the awareness. Bhagavan said, you probably familiar with the passage in Maharshi's Gospel, where Bhagavan explains that ego is called chit jada granti. And he says, in your investigation into the source of the ahamvriti is a synonym for ego, you take the essential chit aspect of ego. And therefore, the investigation leads unfailingly to a pure awareness that you actually are. So when he says, in your investigation into the source of the ahamvriti, you take the essential chit aspect, that means the chit aspect, chit, is the source from which ego has risen.
Yes.
So that is the essence of ego. That's what ego essentially is.
Chit.
So that is what we're investigating.
Okay. Okay. You know it so well, but we keep forgetting. We read, but then we forget.
That's why
practice is good.
keeping our mind dwelling on Bhagavan's teachings,
Yes.
and thinking carefully about them, then only we'll get that clarity of understanding. And that clarity, that is from reading Bhagavan's works, we get a certain amount of clarity. By thinking, that's Sravana. From Sravana, we get the beginnings of the clarity. But to get more clarity, we have to think about it carefully and understand it clearly. What it is, what Bhagavan
Manana.
actually means. We need to, that's a manana.
Manana.
And then the real clarity, the deepest clarity, comes from the nididhyasana, from actually putting this into practice.
Practice, yeah.
Because what is the source of all clarity? It's that light of awareness which is shining in our heart as I. That is silence, that is grace.
And also
that is what we need to investigate.
Sorry, not having thoughts helps.
Not having
thoughts to think.
Why are thoughts a problem?
Thoughts keep coming, and that's the problem.
Thoughts are not a problem. The interest we have in thoughts is the problem. Our liking to attend to the thoughts are a problem.
Yes.
Why don't you take the thoughts as a reminder? Could those thoughts exist if you were not there? Who is it who's aware of these thoughts? To whom do these thoughts appear? So let the thoughts be. Let them appear or disappear. In verse 6 of Aṣṭakam, Bhagavan ends by saying, Nindrida sendrida ninevida vindre. Let them appear or let them disappear. Let them cease or let them go on.
Yeah.
They're not other than you. So what we need to hold on to is the awareness in which the thoughts appear, to whom the thoughts appear. Hold on to that awareness. Forget about thoughts. Thoughts are not a problem.
Thank you so much, Michael. I think
it's our attending to the thoughts is the problem. So if we attend to ourselves, we don't have to worry about thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you so much for such a clear explanation. Thanks a lot.
Right.
Aruṇācala.
Aruṇācala.
So Krish has got a couple of questions. I'll just put the first one. The common definition of meditation I am familiar with is focusing one's attention on one object at the exclusion of all others, whether that be on the breath or a mantra, etc. How did Bhagavan define meditation, and is self-inquiry a type of meditation or in a separate category of its own?
It is a meditation, but it's a meditation unlike all other meditations. As you say, meditation is fixing our mind on something. In other words, fixing our attention on something. In any meditation other than Atma-vichara, what we fix our mind on is some object, a mantra, a chakra in the body, whatever it is, some object, something other than ourselves, a name or form of God. So fixing the mind on something is meditation. The difference between Atma-vichara and all other forms of meditation is in Atma-vichara, we're not fixing our mind or attention on any object. We're fixing it on the subject, on that to which all objects appear. So all other forms of meditation, we are facing away from ourselves. We're turning our attention away from ourselves towards something, towards a name or form of God, towards a mantra, whatever it is. Whereas in Atma-vichara, we are turning our attention in the opposite direction, back towards ourselves. back towards the one to whom all these other things appear. So this is a form of meditation. Bhagavan sometimes referred to it as Swarupa Dhyana. That means meditation on Swarupa, means ourself as we actually are. So meditation on ourself. He also called it Atma-vichara, which also means meditation on oneself. So it's not an objective meditation. It's even to say subjective is not quite, doesn't quite catch it. It is self-meditation. We're meditating on nothing other than ourselves. We're not meditating on any object, but on the one who is aware of all those objects. So it is a type of meditation, but it's a meditation unlike all other meditations. It's fundamentally different, because in this meditation, in any other type of meditation, you've got a meditator and something that is meditated upon. Whereas in this, there's only one thing, but because the meditator is meditating on itself. I hope that's a clear answer.
Yeah, he follows up with, is who am I essentially different from the Vedantic Mahavakyas as an ego-directed inquiry rather than an absolute truth statement? And if one were born without any tradition, which would point one more directly to truth?
Investigating who am I is the import of the Mahavakyas. Why do that is, take the Mahavakya Tattvamasi. You are that, or that you are. What is that? That refers to God or Brahman or whatever. The Mahavakya says you are that. Why does the Mahavakya say you are that? Because before we hear the Mahavakya, we are looking for God or Brahman or happiness or knowledge or whatever it is. We're looking for it outside ourselves. So the Upanishads tell us, you yourself are that. If we understand that correctly, we should turn our attention back towards ourselves. If I am Brahman, then how can I know Brahman without knowing myself? So the way it means to know Brahman is to know I. So it is Bhagavan's teaching of Atma-vichara, the investigation, who am I, is the practical import of all these Mahavakyas. So the purpose of the Mahavakyas is to turn our attention back towards ourselves. But many people fail to grasp that, so they begin meditating on the Mahavakyas. I am not this body, I am that Brahman, and so on. That is not what is meant. The purpose of the Mahavakya is to turn our attention back towards ourselves. Because what do all the Mahavakyas, there are four main Mahavakyas. All those Mahavakyas are pointing out that Brahman is nothing but ourself. There's Tattvamasi, you yourself are that Brahman. Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman. I am Atma Brahman. This very self is Brahman. Prajnanam Brahman, awareness is Brahman. So they're all pointing our attention. The Brahman is not something out there. What is the awareness that knows that that idea of a big Brahman out there, or God up in heaven, or whatever it is, in Kailasa or Vaikuntha or wherever? All this idea of God or Brahman exists for whom? For me. Who am I? So the whole aim of the Mahavakyas is to turn our attention away from seeking God outside ourselves to seeking God inside ourselves as ourselves. So what Bhagavan has taught is not, Bhagavan is fulfilling the aim of all of Vedanta, the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, the Brahma Sutra. The aim of all of them is for us to know ourselves. And how do we know ourselves? by investigating ourselves, by turning our attention back towards ourselves. We can't know ourselves by attending to things outside. We can only know ourselves by attending to ourselves. So that's the very aim of all of Vedanta. So Bhagavan fulfills the aim of Vedanta by pointing out to us the practical implication of all the teachings given in all the Upanishads, the Brahma Sutra, the Bhagavad Gita, and all the other Vedantic texts. Ultimately, they're all about knowing oneself. That is what Bhagavan is teaching us. How to know ourselves, to turn our attention back towards ourselves. It's so simple. So we don't need vast volumes. We don't need to read all the Upanishads or all the commentaries or anything like that. All we need to do is to understand the basics and put them into practice by turning our attention back to ourselves more and more and more.
Thank you for that, Michael.
Bhagavan's teachings are the essence of all of Vedanta. Whereas other great acharyas in the past have written commentaries on the Prasthanatraya, Bhagavan has given us the essence of the Prasthanatraya in his own simple, clear words. The practical implication of all of them.
I think that's all the questions, in fact, unless I've missed anyone in the various little bubbles that you get in the new chat format. Otherwise, speak now and forever hold thy peace, as they say.
Or at least hold your peace for another 2 weeks.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, Michael. Yes, I asked, it's Krish again.
Yes.
I asked a question last week, but you didn't answer it. It was just with regarding to, you know, a lot of the imagery and iconography we see of deities with half closed eyes and half opened eyes.
Yes.
When you look at Kabir's Saint Kabir or Shiva, what does that symbolize? I'm guessing is it the inner state that
I think it symbolizes the inward turned look.
Right. Is that what it symbolizes?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
And if we look within, what we will see, that is when Bhagavan says, I saw what remained when the seer ceased to exist. What remains when the seer ceases to exist is the underlying reality of everything. So by looking within, we will see everything. But we'll not see it as everything, but as it actually is, as the pure awareness, the pure Satchit that it actually is. So the half closed eyes possibly signifies, by looking within, we are seeing the reality of everything outside. But so long as we're looking outside, we're not seeing it as it is. We see it as all these names and forms. By looking within, we see it as the underlying formless being awareness, which is the one reality of all that appears outside. Oh, it's the one reality of both the seer and the seen.
Okay. Thank you.
Right.
Yes, Michael, I had another question.
Yes.
The urge for the survival of the physical body, is that a waste of energy?
The physical body is going to live as long as it is destined to live. It's going to die when it's destined to die. So we don't actually have to take care of this body. It will be taken care of by its destiny. But so long as we identify this body as I, it seems it all depends on us. So we make all this effort to take care of this body, but ultimately this is useless, because how long this body is to survive, how many meals it's to eat, how much air it's to breathe, how much water it's to drink, all what it is to go through. It's all, everything that is required, it will be provided until the time when it meets its destined end. So we don't have to worry about, we don't have to concern ourselves with the body. However, it's very easy to say that, but so long as we take this body to be I, we all naturally so intent upon taking care of this body. That's inevitable. But let's not worry about this. Let the body be. Our aim is to know what we actually are. So let's try to turn our attention more and more within. The more we turn our attention within, the less concern we will have about this body. Because the more our identification with this body will be dissolving. The bonds that bind us to this body will slowly be weakened.
It seems like it's instinctive in the mind. It's a natural part of existence.
Of course, because we identify this body as I. So long as this body seems to be I, we'll do everything we can to protect it, to take care of it. But we need to go beyond that, because if we take this body to be I, we're in for a rude awakening when the death comes, because this body is going to be we're going to be forcibly separated from this body. So better to prepare for death now by investigating what we actually are here and now.
Okay, thank you.
Right.
I mean, the human condition has sort of built into it the necessities to survive. Otherwise,
why even the human condition? Any living being has that has that instinct to survive, because that is all of them, that Dehatma Buddhi, that false awareness, I am this body, is there in every living being, every sentient being.
Maybe the body is thinking it's time for a cup of tea. You've had 3 hours.
Michael, can I ask a quick question, please?
Yeah, yes, certainly.
Do you have any plans to explain verses from Bhagavad Gita Saram at some point?
Perhaps sometime, but it's further down the line. Let's first let me first finish my translations of all Bhagavan's main works. That among Bhagavan's translated works, that's one I particularly like to translate, but I haven't done so yet. But maybe if I finish all my translations of Bhagavan's original work, sometime I'll come round to translating that, because that's a very nice work.
Right. Thank you.
Right.
You'll end up with another birth, Michael, if you put too much in your queue.
It seems so. Who knows? That's all in Bhagavan's hands. I certainly can't save myself, so I'm depending on him to save me when he sees fit.
Okay. Would you like to do the?
Oh yes.
Thank you.
Om Namo Bhagavate Śrī Aruṇācala Ramanaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Śrī Aruṇācala Ramanaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Śrī Aruṇācala Ramanaya.